Hello, preacher. You are a servant of God, and the work you are doing is so important. This is a ministry mentoring podcast where we want to encourage preachers every week, helping you start strong, keep going, and keep growing. For the first year of this podcast, we're going to be focusing on your first year in ministry. As you are starting out, lessons that you can take with you to help you hit the ground running and succeed in ministry. I'm joined today by Kevin Rhodes, who is the director of the Brown Trail School of Preaching. Kevin, it's good to have you on.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your experience as we get started?
I am the executive director of the Brown Trail School of Preaching. I've been here for some time now and enjoyed both training you guys and many more, and been preaching for over 30 years, written several books along the way, and I'm excited to enter this world, be able to continue to help preachers grow.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to have you on the podcast. We're also joined by Neil Stidolph, who is the Dean of Students at Brown Trail. Neil, it's good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Caleb.
And would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience as well?
Well, as you said, currently I'm working as the Dean of Students here at the school. Been here since June of 2025. I've been in ministry before that, mainly in the Panhandle of Texas, so a small congregation up there. And then also just been able to do some speaking and different work around different places before and after I went to school here at Brown Trail.
Thanks, Neil. One of our goals with this podcast is to encourage preachers, especially new preachers or young preachers, to start strong in ministry. Beginning in ministry is exciting, and it should be. There's a natural energy whenever you start something new, which is really a new stage of life. And when it comes to preaching, if we know how important ministry is and how important preaching is, then there should be an energy that comes with that. At the same time, we'll talk about today how there can also be some challenges and some stresses with starting a new work. But we need to start off by recognizing how good it is to be excited. Kevin, why do you think it is important to be excited in a new work?
Well, you're going to need that energy. You need the positivity. You need a freshness that comes with that, and to be able to get out and going requires a lot from you. And so having energy at the very beginning means you can get off and start some things good and really make a difference as you begin. You're getting an opportunity to do a lot. There's a lot of goodwill coming your way. You're excited. You're thinking good thoughts. They're thinking good thoughts about you. And you can build on that with the right kind of energy, and you don't want to waste that opportunity.
Yeah. And so when you have that kind of excitement, that can help motivate you to do the work you need to do, to focus on the tasks that are in front of you, because there are a lot. And when you get started in ministry, really, there's no kind of warm-up period usually. You go right into it. And so when we think about getting into ministry and having that excitement, that newness to it, what advice do you have for someone who's navigating that kind of energy?
Focus on serving God and serving the people, and then getting the right priorities that come from that, and making sure simply you start off. You don't try to want to overwhelm yourself too early. That's part of it. Sometimes you're so excited you do too much too early, but you want to use that and focus on doing the best job you can in the right things from the very beginning. And that means paying a lot of attention, building relationships, and making sure that you are growing in your work. You're just getting started, so make sure you're doing your best job in your study and in the pulpit in your classes. And that really will matter.
Neil, what do you think could be some of the challenges that come with that energy as you're trying to use it in the right way?
That's a really good question. When you think about, generally speaking, the way that a person is trained to prepare for a role like this. When a guy comes out of school, for example, and he steps into his first work, there is so much bouncing around in his head of, this is something that I want to be aware of to help the congregation. This is something that I know needs to happen. This is a change I know needs to be made. There's all these things going into it are going to need to happen, especially because of the pace. If you are coming straight out of school or something like that, the pace of what you've just been in is so fast and so much is happening quickly. The instinct is going to be to try and start making a lot of changes quickly, start doing a lot of things quickly. That is not helpful at the very beginning. So I would very much encourage, one of the first things you need to realize as far as challenges go is you're going to want to do too much right away. And you can't do that. You've got to stop yourself.
So when you're trying to figure out then what you need to do and what you need to start with, you don't want to do too much. You don't want to come in guns a-blazing, trying to change everything. Like you said, what are the right areas to focus on in a new work as you're getting started? What are the things you do in the congregation from the beginning as you're getting started with this energy?
Well, I think one of the first things, this is something that I remember being told right before I graduated Brown Trail and stuck with me ever since. Your job is to listen when you're first starting. Your job is to listen to the people, listen to their leadership, listen just the community even. Your job is to listen so that you know where people are. If you don't know where people are, whether that's your congregation or your community, you're really not going to know how to get them from point A to point B because you don't know what point A is. And so you've got to start simply by listening. That's one of the first places you got to put your focus. And because of that, most of your energy has to then be, besides the listening part of it, focused on building yourself up into who you need to be so that when it's time to get past the listening phase, you're ready to actually help because you have invested what you need in your own abilities to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how we think of the work of a preacher and so much of it has to do with talking and what we say to other people. And if that's what we've been trained to do, that's what we're excited about. That's what we're ready for. And so I think I really appreciate that balance there of your first work is learning where people are at, learning what they really need so that you can preach and teach and counsel and guide them in the right way. Also mentioned working on yourself. Kevin, what are some good ways that a new preacher can start good habits of working on ourselves?
I think you need to have a good plan. You need to realize that's going to be a challenge and you need to plan it out. And that means you have to be good with your time management. You need to be disciplined and you need to have something in a very specific space to indicate, here's what I need to do every week. And it's about building consistency. So whatever time you need for your sermons and for your classes, you either need, and I'll give options here, you either need to build in a method of study where you force upon yourself, whether you're studying for personal knowledge and growth as part of the process of working on that material, or, and that's a little harder to do, but if you can't do that, to have a separate study you do that is really focused on you. But either way, what you need to do is make sure that you are growing yourself. People tend to jump in and think, I've learned what I've got to learn, even though everyone is told, no, you're just beginning. And that your first job is not teaching the congregation, it's learning how to continue to learn yourself. That's the first thing you need to learn. And so get busy in the study of assigning yourself things to learn, things you need to grow in, and then apply yourself to that as part of your work, just as much as the sermons and classes are for everyone else.
And I think adding on to that, you will not have the time to do that later. If you don't install those habits firmly at the very outset, when you have a little bit of time and you kind of, not everything has just come crashing in terms of the work yet. There's a little bit of kind of, okay, certain things haven't fully kicked off. If you don't start it then, you're going to have to work so much harder to get those habits ingrained later down the road in your ministry. So you've really got to put that work in at the outset, or else you're going to be much less likely to do what you need to do in that regard.
Think about, in some ways, you think about things you learned in school that really excited you, that you wanted to learn more but didn't have time to study while you were in school. Or maybe there were some areas where you felt like, I would have liked to have heard more about that, and I want to concentrate on that. I recommend focusing on 2 areas, no more than that extra, and applying yourself both through reading and direct study. If it's of a text, I like to have a textual study and then a topical study. That way you can read a lot of material on the topical and study the other, and you apply yourself in that way, and you do it systematically. And to realize, I'm trying to get into areas where I'm going to automatically be motivated because I want to learn. Whenever you get out of school, no one else is there to assign you your topics or to tell you, here's what we're doing now. You need to learn to say, this is a blind spot for me. I need to improve in this, or this is something of interest that I want to really build on. But use those things to motivate yourself, and make sure to shave off some time, whatever you're doing in your work, where you're always working on you too. Otherwise, you will burn out and you will not be what you need to be to do all the other work.
I think my tendency would be, especially if I was coming out of school or similar thing and starting this new work, my tendency would be to want to take a break, to kind of put that off and say, I've been studying hard, I've been preparing myself, and now I'm so excited to do it. But what I'm hearing both of you say is it's important to start that right from the beginning, to set those habits of learning and continuing your education and growing and doing those things from the very beginning, before you get too busy or too distracted or with these other things, because then it might fall by the wayside and you might have good goals, but not the habits to actually reach them.
Well, and I think to that point, that's a really good point. Part of the habits you need to be establishing early on are habits related to taking time that you need not to burn out. So to your point about taking a break, that's part of that, is making sure you're setting sustainable process and sustainable goals for yourself, so that yes, you do need that downtime, especially when you're coming out of school, you're going into a new work. That's part of the habits you are establishing. So it's not like I get in here and all the habits I'm establishing are just work. But at the same time, I am doing some work to establish the habits. But part of those habits are habits that allow me to be self-sustaining and not burn out when I'm making that transition.
I agree with him. And it's so easy, though, to use that break and to take off and, I'm just going to take a break for, a few months, and before long, a few months has become a year. Before long, a year has become 5 years. And all the things that I had originally wanted to study, I haven't studied, and my habits are now set in at a much level down to where I'm not used to actually incorporating personal growth in. And now I really need it because I can't use what I had in school anymore. That's all kind of gone. And I also did not develop me in the process. And now I'm considering quitting the ministry. That's what I've noticed has been a basic mode and a habit that has happened over the years.
And so what I kind of see in that is there are 2 extremes we have to avoid. And one is going into ministry without any goals or plan for growth and just kind of planning to coast along. And we need an intentional plan. We need to work hard. We need to develop ourselves. But then on the other side, what I also hear in that is that it's possible to go in with unrealistic goals and too high expectations. And so we have to be careful not to burn ourselves out in ministry, and also to keep fueling ourselves in ministry through that work, through that plan. And so both of those things have to be guarded against. And the way to do that is with an intentional plan with understanding myself, understanding the work. Here's what I need to work on. Here's the areas I want to grow. Here's the habits I want to develop. And doing that in some intentional way from the very start. Moving from the personal area of that to with the congregation as you're starting out, what kind of plan do you need with a church as you are beginning a new ministry?
Well, you first of all need a preaching plan, because that's immediate. You need to have figured out what kind of classes would begin well to start teaching, and what your plan is for them. And you don't want to do anything too long-term early, because like Neil said earlier, you need to evaluate where they are, and that should dictate more the nature of your sermons, the topics, and where your classes are. So you need to kind of do something and have a plan that is flexible and that is going to be congregational focused, but that you go in and say, okay, I need to have it set up with a basic plan. I'd say when you begin, you need to establish your own credibility. And that means you need to get in basics of what the church is, salvation. If you need to preach on Jesus and God, and not try to prove how deep you are. You need to actually just preach and remind them of responsibilities that come from that, and not try to get into every little thing that might come up or something you notice early on. You need to note that, put it aside, and think about later on how I want to handle that. It's more important to establish a foundation than spend your life chasing every little fire that comes along. Build your foundation first, and then you'll be better prepared to kind of build upon that in the right way later.
Think about, I don't remember if someone told me this or if I just finally realized it one day, but it doesn't matter how true the words you're saying are. If you don't have the credibility for that to be received, you are not going to be as effective. Now, sometimes that's a problem with your audience. But when you're first starting out in a work, if you try and tackle things that are going to take a lot more credibility before you can really be received in sharing them, you need to save that. Unless it's an extenuating circumstance, which might be a different situation. But typically speaking, there are some topics you might already know the truth on, be able to put a great lesson together on, but you don't have the credibility yet. And you've got to accept that, which takes a little bit of humility going into it as well.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. I mean, we think about what Jesus said in John 16 when he told the disciples, I have many things to say to you, but you can't bear them now. You aren't ready for those things. And Jesus, of course, didn't have a credibility issue, but he recognized as a teacher, there were things that his audience, the disciples, they weren't ready to hear. They weren't ready to understand it. And so as I'm planning my preaching and getting started, the temptation might be to come out proving everything I know, to go out trying to show how much smarter I am than they are. And some of those might be issues of pride or arrogance, which we need to be very careful about. I think sometimes, though, I know looking in the mirror and talking with other friends I've had who have recently started in ministry, it doesn't necessarily come from pride or arrogance. Sometimes it comes from a sincere desire to want to teach and to want people to know the things that I've learned, to see the things that I've seen that are incredible to me and interesting to me and have changed my life. But I have to realize it took me a long time to get there, and I can't just come in and get people there in the first 2 or 3 weeks. I need a plan to say, where am I going to start? What are they ready for? What are the immediate needs of the congregation? And I need to focus there and think long term when it comes to some of these deeper or more difficult subjects that do need to be taught and do need to be addressed. But I've got to build up my credibility with them for that. And so when I'm coming in with this plan, I've got a plan for my personal life. I'm developing a plan for my preaching. What about with the congregation itself? As I'm moving to a new location, how do I navigate getting situated in a new congregation?
I recommend to the students that they need to get a hold of the directory as soon as they possibly can and lay out a plan to visit everyone in that directory and to take notes on getting to know people, getting to know their background and know what they did previously if they're retired, what they do if they're not, but how they became a Christian, what their spiritual background is before they came to that congregation, even all those kind of things, because that'll be very helpful to understand who they are, where they're coming from. When you're trying to maybe work toward a problem or that something comes up, you can kind of have some perspective and realize they didn't get here overnight. This is just something that they've grown up with or had for a long time. It's going to take a while. So get to know people, put it in your plan to visit and to find those people and to take notes and really personalize it and then review it, because that helps get your face in front of them personally, which is going to help them listen and also build your credibility with them personally. And it helps you know them in a more personal way, which is going to help you develop the kind of applications without, and I'm not talking about being very specific to individual people, but just the kind of applications that are really important that will be beneficial to the people as a whole.
Well, and personal example related to that. So whenever I started my first work after school, number one, it was the middle of COVID, right? So that made a huge challenge just artificially for me coming into that congregation because I'm trying to get to know people, but I can't go and visit them. So what I did was essentially what you're describing. I got a directory, and in my case, I sat down with a couple of the elders' wives, and I basically just went through the directory and said, okay, can you help me just understand the situation with each person as I'm going through? Not any kind of gossip or anything, but like who's related to who, where do they live, where do they work, those kind of just basic information, just kind of get a sense for the congregation, for the people, so that I'd be able to have a better opportunity to develop those relationships given that situation. So yeah, I think that's very good advice.
I think when you're looking at, the member list or the directory or whatever it is you have, I think you probably will very quickly notice a few different categories of people and different types of people. Starting with the basics is you need to get to know the elders if the church has elders, and hopefully they do. And also for that, I'd mention, since I brought it up, is if a church doesn't have elders, the more you get to know people, the more you're going to know about who might be qualified to be an elder or why someone might be unqualified. And that can be important information to have from the very beginning.
Yes.
That's part of getting to know people. And so you need to get to know the elders. You need to get to know the members and who are the ones who are involved, who are the ones who are a little more distant. That can be helpful to know. You need to, in some way, get to know the shut-ins of the congregation. Sometimes what happens is, members of the church expect you to know these people because you're the preacher and they're part of the church, but you've never met them because they've never been there. And if you don't make an effort to say, who are these people and how do I get to know them, then you might never know who exactly they are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you want to think ahead, and I don't want to be morbid about this, but you could quite possibly be doing the funerals for these people. It would be nice if you'd met them and if you knew a little bit about them and that you could have a relationship with them, that the family would know you had a relationship with them before that happens. So it's really valuable to get to know it. And sometimes it can be very hard. It certainly was during COVID. But to take the opportunity just to know a little bit and to do that interview process. And you might find out, I had an opportunity to have some people at the nursing home years ago at a congregation. And a couple that were in this nursing home, they'd been married for 80 years. And it was amazing. And they died the same day. And I did not do that funeral, but I was at the funeral. And it was just one of those amazing things about you take the time to know just a little bit. And you have this little bit to interact with, and you can build a relationship upon that rather than it being just kind of a name. If you're going into ministry, don't let anybody that's in that congregation just be a name.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one of the other side benefits, I say side benefit, it's one of the main benefits probably, that you get from getting into the congregation is as you learn who the people are, you'll also learn who your first evangelistic contacts are going to be. And so you might learn there's people who sit in the pews every Sunday who are not Christians, who were never taught or never obeyed the gospel. And so you have context there that you can start with of these people need to know. You might learn someone's been a long-time visitor. No one's ever studied with them. You might learn just by building relationships, getting to know people, there are some that they thought were members who actually were never taught the gospel. And so I've run into that situation of people that were seen as members by most of the church because they just didn't realize that these people were never taught the truth and had never obeyed the gospel. And so the more you can get to know people, the more of that you can realize from the beginning. But also you'll learn about connections. You'll learn who has family members who are not Christians. You'll learn just by being around members what contacts they have that you can then help work with. And so from week one, getting to know the congregation is going to help every part of your work. Your preaching and the applications you're able to make, your evangelism and the contacts you have, your ministry, caring for them, doing funerals if that comes up, and all of those things.
Yeah, and I would broaden about on that because I think that's really good. You also can find out from those people, it's often family members, But what Neil talked about with talking to elders' wives is who are the members who are no longer there that you could maybe go back, and I call it re-evangelism. When you need to go back, and these people are Christians, they've fallen away. That's a great place to start because you can go there. You're the fresh new face, and they
Yes.
might come hear the new preacher. And if you could develop a relationship with them early on that shows personal interest, then you might be the one who could get them back. No guarantees, but at least you know you're not starting from scratch.
Yeah. The first 6 months, I think, are such a critical time for that. Because once you get into it, once you start getting a little more known and things go around, and then let's say you visit, it's like, I'm so-and-so. I hear you were a member of this church. I've been preaching there for 3 years and I finally dropped by. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't have the same personal connection or potential, I think. And so that first 6 months when you can say, I'm the new preacher here and I'm here with so-and-so, or I'm here with this elder here. And they said, you used to be there and I'd love to talk to you about that, or wherever you can go from there, even if it's just getting to know who they are. I think that can be so valuable in that critical first 6 months.
Yes. And something else I want to throw out there related to this, obviously going where they are, visiting them, etc., that is very, very important. Something that my wife and I found, though, throughout this whole process, especially in our particular area, and it's going to be different, right, in a congregation, in a community, but if at all possible, get into the habit early on and prepare yourself to get into this habit before you even move to the congregation of having people into your home.
Yes.
That is something that is so helpful and so key, because it's an environment that in many ways people can kind of relax more than if you're the preacher coming to their house, or if you're the preacher in the auditorium or church building talking to them. You're just sitting around a kitchen table. They're in your home. You can, if you have pets or whatever, the pets are there. The kids are running around. If you have kids, it's just a much more relationship building type environment. And so much good can come from that, especially with the people that maybe aren't coming to church anymore or whatever. It creates this rapport that you can't hardly get many other ways.
Agreed.
So we've talked about having a personal plan for growth, having a plan for your preaching, and now having a plan to get to know the congregation and get to know who you need to evangelize, whether it's wayward members or those who aren't Christians. And all of that you're doing from the start in your planning and your preparation. But one thing we haven't talked about as much yet is really about yourself, in the sense of becoming part of a new congregation, probably moving to a new city or new area. Neil, is there any kind of culture shock or any obstacle there that could come with that?
Absolutely. Just at face value, I mean, moving is one of the most disruptive activities human beings do, right? So as you said, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be physically moving from one town to another or one house to another. So that by itself is going to be a culture shock, even just in an isolated sense. But then, again, I think about in my personal experience, my first work, we went from DFW area / a place close to the DFW area, both areas that were fairly city and suburban, to a county with 2,000 people in the entire county, right? Now, wonderful people, but completely different environment. Yes, there's going to be some culture shock. And even if it's not that drastic, there's going to be some culture shock because every community has a different culture. Every church has a different culture. And you have to recognize and be prepared for that, not only from the standpoint of just general life for yourself and your work and the church. You also have to recognize this is going to be culture shock for your family. You have to be preparing your spouse, if there's any kids involved, anything like that, for that shock and that transition, and be supporting them through that, not solely focusing just on the work, or else you're going to run into a lot of problems related to that transition.
Yeah, I agree. And especially about the culture part of it, because it can be very easy, if you haven't done this before, to try to push a culture with which you were familiar, that you admired, maybe the culture of the congregation where the preaching school was or where you came from before, and you use that as your model for what is the absolute best way to do things in the church. And so you're going to try to make that congregation fit that mold instead of, again, waiting, listening, finding out more about them, and realizing that you can't do cookie cutter congregations. And you're going to have to instead be able to apply principles and grow people spiritually instead of trying to kind of slap a kind of a mold on top of people and force them into it unnaturally. It's far better to listen, to grow, and to recognize differences and have some awareness about things that really don't matter, and that you have to accept that you're going to have to be the one to change instead of trying to force the whole congregation to adapt to you. So you're going to have to be willing to make some changes. They're already having to listen to some different guy who preaches a different way, has a different style, and maybe a different accent. They're already doing that. So you need to be going in saying, I'm going to have to make some changes and adaptations too.
I think that's a great point. And really, that, I think, affects everything else we've talked about to some level. Because as we're making all these plans and we're excited about all these plans and goals we have week one, the problem is you make all these plans as you're going in and getting started before you've really gotten to know the congregation and the culture and what things need to be. And so it's so important to be flexible with your plans, to have these goals and have these plans for your preaching, for your personal development, for getting to know people. And at the same time to say, these plans are not going to be my master. I'm not subject to these plans. These plans are tools that I'm using. And so if the plan isn't working, or if the plan doesn't fit this church, then I've got to be able to step back and adapt.
Adapt. That's such a good word, because we're not talking about content, right? We're not talking about changing doctrine, changing truth, changing what you're preaching. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about things that are expedient. We're talking about culture. We're talking about how, not the what, but the how. If you are not, I cannot stress this enough, if you are not adaptable in terms of the how to what is going to be most effective in communicating that unchanging message, if you're not adaptable in that, you're going to end up hurting the congregation rather than helping it, because you are too short-sighted to recognize that there are ways that you can accomplish something that are going to work here that you may never have thought of before. So you've got to have that adaptability.
And that means we need to be patient with the congregation, and we need to be patient with ourselves. We've got to take it slow as we get starting. Even though we might have this excitement, it's like a honeymoon period with the church, and we're ready to just do everything we've wanted to do and put all that we've learned into practice, is we have to be patient with ourselves and tell ourselves, I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, I'm going to figure out what works here, and not try to rush into my preconceived ideas of what this work is going to look like.
Yeah, there has to be a self-awareness that preachers need, and then an awareness about what the congregation needs. And I like what you said about patience, because you're not going to have all that right away. And you need to realize yourself where you are and to think about what's best, and take some time and to accept that maybe given some time, you're going to see things in a different perspective. And we sometimes misinterpret motives because we're so quick to see a problem. And that gets us into trouble because we start thinking about people the wrong way and judging people for all the wrong reasons because of a problem that we have, but we're not even aware of it. So we need to fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a great first discussion as we're talking about getting started in ministry and going strong. So I'm looking forward to where this podcast is going to go, the discussions we're going to have. Before we wrap up this first episode, Kevin, I'd like to ask you to give us a last word, if you will, on getting started by hitting the ground running in ministry. If someone has, say, just left school or is from anywhere entering a new work and getting started, what do you want to say to them to encourage them in that work?
I would encourage them, first of all, that if they've been trained that they can do this. It can be overwhelming. It start off as saying you can do this as long as you don't try to do too much too soon. So you just concentrate on what's before you, that every week and try to get in just a routine. And that's what's so important about this first week, is establish a routine that is doable and repeatable, where you are studying and study things that you can love the people, and love what you study, and learn to love to study. Some guys come out of school and they kind of went in thinking they were going to learn everything, and then they just kind of go out and kind of do a lot of stuff. No, you have to learn to love this process, learn to love learning, and to give your whole heart to it, saving time for family, work all this in up front, and have confidence in building your own faith. And keep in mind, you're doing this for the right reasons, for your Lord. You're doing this for salvation, and you are looking to heaven. So let's make sure we realize we're doing something that matters, it's positive, and that when you do it that way and you do it the Lord's way, you'll always do something worthwhile. And that's why you have value in the pulpit.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, Neil. And thank you, preacher, for joining our conversation today on the Ministry Mentoring Podcast. Follow the podcast wherever you listen to make sure you catch the next conversation each week. This podcast is hosted by the Brown Trail School of Preaching as a way to encourage and provide value to ministers everywhere. May God bless you as you grow in his service.